The world did not end with a bang or a whisper, but with the cold, unforgiving feel of kitchen tile beneath my hands. What was supposed to be a quiet dinner at my father's house in Redwood Falls had become a battlefield of passive aggression and psychological warfare. A stage I knew all too well. My father, Arthur, kept the television volume impossibly loud, the sound a physical barrier between us. My sister, Paige, was glued to her phone, a perfect imitation of detached indifference. I set a bag of groceries on the counter, a silent offering of peace, and tried to keep the air from cracking. Sit. My father commanded, not with the warmth of a welcome, but the finality of an order. He pulled a plastic pitcher of iced tea from the fridge, pouring me a glass as though it were a kingly favor. Quit tapping your foot. You're back stateside. No one's shooting at you. His words, laced with a mockery of my military service, were a familiar sting. Thanks, I replied, taking a dutiful sip. It was just sweet, store-brand tea. Nothing special, but in his home, every gesture had a hidden price. Paige glanced up, her cheerleader voice dripping with saccharine cruelty. Captain Hannah, gracing us with her presence, she said. Tell us again how everyone clapped at the airport. I ignored the jab. I start the new role soon, I said, a deliberate effort to keep my response brief. It's a training assignment at Fort Bragg. No bragging, no lengthy details. The Army teaches brevity, and so did years of this. My father rubbed the back of his neck, his posture a familiar blend of aggression and disdain. Training. So, they're putting you behind a desk because you can't hack the real thing anymore? Or because I did my part? I said, my voice calm and even. A lesson learned from debriefings with colonel's tone is everything. Paige snorted. Here we go again with the great American hero. I took another sip of tea, the liquid doing little to soothe the tension. The kitchen smelled of disinfectant and old fried food, a strange, sterile scent that felt oddly suffocating. The sports commentator on the television screamed about a game my father wasn't even watching, just a constant, meaningless noise he used to fill silence. I asked him how his truck was running, a simple question to deflect his anger, but he ignored it completely. Respect, he began, the word a heavy weight in the room. You come in my house, you say thank you. You quit fidgeting, you stop acting like you're better than us. I did say thank you, I responded, my voice flat. Oh, what? He sneered, waving his hand at the bag. You want a medal for bread? It's fine, I said, trying to de-escalate. Keep it short. Keep it easy. It was in the vacuum of that silence that I felt it. A sharp pinch, a searing pain under my ribs. At first, it was nothing. I chalked it up to stress. I reached for my tea again, but the glass felt heavy. I took half a swallow and set it down, my movements slowed by an unseen force. The pinch did not relent, it spread, blossoming into a deep ache that stole my breath. I tried to inhale, to reset, and realized I was getting very little air. Paige finally looked up from her phone. What now? She asked, a familiar mix of annoyance and boredom on her face. Dizzy. I managed, my voice strained. I put a hand on the counter to steady myself. I tried to take a proper breath. Not good. The air was there, but my lungs felt shrunken, constricted by some unseen, malevolent force. I lowered myself into a chair, then onto the floor, my legs failing to hold me. My father stared, a confused frown on his face. What are you doing? I'm out of breath, I said, a simple, factual statement devoid of drama. In a crisis, the facts are all that matter. You're fine, he barked, taking a step closer. Stop making a scene? Not making one, I tried to say, but the words were stolen from me by the suffocating feeling in my chest. The room didn't spin, it narrowed, as if someone had turned a dial on reality itself. I pressed my palm flat on the cool, clean tile floor, trying to anchor myself. I focused on the next inhale, but it was still wrong. Paige rolled her eyes and leaned on the counter, her voice dripping with scorn. She does this. If people aren't staring at her, she wilts. Call 911, I rasped, the words far smaller than I intended. I reached for my phone, but my fingers, so precise in 1,000 situations, now lacked their usual grip. I hated that. My father didn't move. No one's calling anyone, he declared, his voice a rule, not an observation. You're fine. I gripped the counter and pulled myself closer, managing to swipe my phone off the edge. It slid down, clipped my arm, and hit the floor with a soft thud. I fumbled for the side button, a sequence known by rote. I pressed, held, and the emergency screen popped up. I tapped 911 and hit the speaker. My voice, I knew, would not last. The line clicked. 911, what's your emergency? A dispatcher's voice, calm and clear, came through. I opened my mouth and a broken, inhuman sound escaped. Air in, air out. Not enough. Breathing, I managed. That was it. Paige looked genuinely annoyed now. Oh my God, she groaned. My father reached for the phone, as if to end the call, but stopped when the dispatcher spoke again. If you can't speak, don't hang up. We can hear you. Is anyone there? Tap the phone once for yes. I tapped once with the heel of my hand. As the patient an adult, I tapped once. Difficulty breathing. I tapped once. Stay on the line. My father looked down at me, a mixture of shame and fury on his face, as if I had embarrassed him in front of a guest. You brought this on yourself, he said. You drink too fast, you don't eat. You run around like you're late for a parade. Paige tried to salvage the moment with a cruel joke. Maybe she misses getting yelled at by officers. We can help with that. I counted my breaths. That's all, keep the pace. In through the nose, out through the mouth. The technique did little, but doing something felt better than doing nothing. My hands tingled. I pressed one to my stomach, feeling for movement, making sure I wasn't imagining it. My father went back to the sink, rinsing a plate that didn't need rinsing, his back to me. This is exactly why people say you're dramatic. I broke a habit of a lifetime. Sir, I said, the words slipping out without thought. I need help. He didn't turn around. You need to stop this. The dispatcher's voice remained a steady rock. We have units in the area. Is the front door unlocked? Tap once for yes, twice for no. I thought about it. The door to this house always stuck, and he always kept the deadbolt on. I tapped twice. Okay, the dispatcher said. If someone can unlock it, do that now. My father shook his head in disgust. No one's coming in my house for a panic attack. My chest tightened another notch. This was not panic. I'd weathered true adrenaline dumps on the battlefield. This was different, and it was not something you could simply power through. I tried to take a deeper breath and hit a wall of what was possible. I shifted my position to open my lungs more, knees bent, chin lifted, basic instinctual movements. Paige finally put her phone down. You're getting sweat all over the floor, she said. The compassion in this family was truly a crowd pleaser. I stared at the tea glass on the counter, a circle of condensation on the tile below it, the kind of mark you only notice after it has been made. I had one swallow left in it, and I couldn't decide whether to reach for it or throw it. I left it alone. My father, with a grim determination, turned the television up using the kitchen remote. The noise of sports spilled over the dispatcher's voice. The volume was not an accident. He liked things loud when he was uncomfortable. Can someone unlock the front door? The dispatcher asked again, her voice strained but clear. We're 3 minutes out. I'll do it, Paige said, but it sounded like a dare. A final act of theatrical defiance. She walked out, her shoes squeaking on the laminate. The deadbolt slid back with a sharp click, a sound as piercing as a gunshot in a quiet range. My father looked at me, finally registering that this was not going away on his terms. Get up, he growled. Can't, I said. That word, at least, I could manage. My hands were steady enough to adjust the phone a little closer. Short of breath, I added, the syllables feeling like I was pushing them uphill. Mom, stay where you are and keep breathing, the dispatcher said. Help is almost there. Almost is a strange word when you're counting the final seconds by breath. I kept my eyes on the grout line in front of me, because it didn't move and it held no opinions. I checked myself as I was trained. Am I conscious? Yes. Oriented. Name, place, day, yes. Airway clear but tight. Breathing shallow. Circulation, hands tingling. Heart rate up. That was data. Data was calm. My father stood with his arms crossed, leaning against the counter like he was waiting for a late pizza. "You always did this?" he said. "Needed a crowd." "I needed a family," I said, my voice not loud, just honest. If the words landed, he didn't show it. Paige came back and hovered near the doorway. She finally looked at my face long enough to see something she didn't like. Her smirk slipped. She didn't say anything, which was new. The dispatcher's voice remained level. "You're doing fine. Keep breathing. If there's someone with you, they should gather medications or allergies." "She doesn't take anything?" my father said, a hollow boast. I focused on the next breath, then the next. The phone speaker crackled. The television barked on. The ice in the glass settled with a soft clink. I shifted my weight to keep my shoulder from going numb. I listened for footsteps outside and kept my eyes open. There was nothing else to do but breathe and let the noise around me do whatever it was going to do while I held my place on the floor and kept the line open. The siren outside was faint at first, a low hum that grew closer until I could feel it through the tile under my hand. The front door rattled once, then opened hard. Boots moved fast across the floor. Paige stepped back as if she hadn't expected them to actually come inside. 2 EMTs came into view, one tall with a trimmed beard, the other younger, carrying a bag. The older one, Frank, crouched beside me. "Captain, can you hear me?" His tone was clipped calm. He didn't wait for my nod. He tilted my chin, checked my pulse, then slid the oxygen mask over my face. The hiss of air was immediate, a rush of something that burned going in but settled after a second. My father barked, "She's fine, waste of time." The EMT didn't even glance at him. He tightened the strap, checked the flow rate, and leaned toward me. "Stay with me. You're getting oxygen now." His partner clipped a monitor to my finger, watching the numbers. "They weren't good. Paige told you, just wants attention." The younger EMT ignored her and called out the reading. Pulse ox 78, heart rate 145. Frank looked at his partner, then at me. He pressed the radio on his shoulder. "Dispatch, patient showing signs consistent with poisoning. Requesting law enforcement on scene." The words were clear enough to cut through everything. Poisoning. My father's face tightened as if the EMT had said something obscene. "That's ridiculous." The EMT's voice stayed level. "Sir, step back." I felt my chest loosen slightly with the oxygen. Not perfect, but better than before. I pulled one side of the mask away just enough to speak. "Tea," I whispered. That was all I could manage. The EMT followed my gaze to the glass on the counter. He nodded once. His partner pulled a small evidence bag from his kit, slipped on gloves, and picked up the glass. The officer who had followed them in took it immediately, sealing the bag. My father's jaw clenched so hard I could see the muscle twitch. The officer said, "Sir, I need you both in the living room while we stabilize her." His tone was not a suggestion. Paige scoffed. "This is insane." Still, she walked out, crossing her arms. My father lingered, arms stiff at his sides, but the officer moved closer, and he finally stepped away. Frank checked my pupils, shined a light, then looked me straight in the eyes. "Stay awake. You're safe now." I nodded faintly under the mask. The air was doing its job. My fingers didn't feel as numb. The officer leaned toward the EMT. "You're thinking antifreeze, Frank," the EMT said quietly. "Not for the room, but not exactly hiding it either." My father heard. "That's a damn lie," the officer said. "Sir, if you keep interfering, I'll have you restrained." The EMT gave me another pulse check. "Improving. 85 now." "We're moving her." They lifted me onto the stretcher, tightened the straps. The younger EMT adjusted the oxygen tank and wheeled me fast through the door. Cold air hit as we moved outside. The night smelled like wet asphalt and exhaust. Red and blue lights bounced across the walls of the house, making it look like a stage set. As they slid me into the ambulance, I caught sight of my father on the porch, arguing with the officer. Paige was standing with her arms folded, her smirk fading as the bag with the glass disappeared into the cruiser. The older EMT climbed in beside me, locking the stretcher in place. He checked my vitals again, then leaned closer. "Name." "Hannah." I rasped under the mask. "Good. You're awake?" You're talking? What branch? Army. I managed. He gave a short nod. Figures, you've got that look. He jotted something on a clipboard, then gave me a look that was steady. No nonsense. You did the right thing calling. Don't downplay what happened. The ambulance doors opened fast when we arrived. Hospital staff were already waiting. They rolled me straight past the waiting area. Fluorescent lights overhead, wheels rattling. A nurse clipped another monitor to my chest. Another drew blood, vials filling quickly. The EMT handed off paperwork to the doctor, then looked back at me. We'll be right outside. You're not alone. The doctor, a man with tired eyes but steady hands, scanned the monitor. Oxygen improving. We'll know more after the tox screen. He looked at me. Do you remember what you drank? I forced out the word. Tea. The doctor's expression didn't change, but he made a note. We'll run a full panel. I watched through the glass door as the officer handed the evidence bag to another detective. Paige sat in the waiting area, glued to her phone, her leg bouncing. My father was leaning forward, voice raised, trying to convince someone of something. Nobody looked convinced. The officer who had collected the glass leaned in through the doorway. Miss Grant will need a statement once you're stable. I managed a nod. The mask fogging with the exhale. The doctor finished another note and looked back at me. You're lucky someone called when they did. We'll keep you here for observation. My father's voice carried faintly from the waiting room, sharp and defensive, arguing into his phone. Paige laughed at something on her screen, but her eyes flicked up, catching me through the glass. For the first time all night, she didn't smile. She just stared. The oxygen hissed steady, filling the silence that hung in the corners of the room. The nurse slid the curtain closed, leaving just the hum of the monitor and the hiss of oxygen. Dr. Adler stood at the end of the bed holding a fresh set of labs. He looked up once, then back down at the paper. Your levels show metabolic acidosis. That's not dehydration, that's poison. He said it plainly, no drama, like he'd given the same news before. I tightened my grip on the blanket. What kind? He set the chart down. Early indicators point to ethylene glycol, antifreeze. He watched my reaction the way you'd watch a patient's pupils. It matches the symptoms in the labs. I swallowed hard against the bitter taste already in my mouth. So, it wasn't. No. He cut in. This wasn't stress or anxiety. This was deliberate. The officer at the door, Detective Miller, had been silent until then. She stepped closer. Mid-40s neat suit, badge clipped to her belt. That glass is already at the crime lab. We'll know soon. But your blood work is telling the same story. I nodded slowly, the mask fogging as I exhaled. Figures. Doctor. Adler wrote another note and spoke to the nurse. Continue antidote protocol. Watch renal function. Then to me, we'll monitor you overnight. You're not leaving until your numbers stabilize. Through the glass window, I could see my father waving his arms while talking to a hospital security officer. His face red. Paige leaned back in her chair, scrolling, pretending she wasn't listening. Detective Miller turned her head toward the window. We separated them, but they're both running the same line saying, "You're exaggerating." I pulled the mask slightly aside. They always say that. My voice cracked from dryness, but the point landed. Detective Miller didn't flinch. We'll be taking formal statements. Do you remember when you last saw that glass before drinking from it? Dad poured it. I said. Pulled the pitcher out, poured me a glass, set it down. I didn't touch it before that. Anyone else near it? She asked. Paige, I answered. She walked past, but it was already on the counter. The detective nodded once like a puzzle piece had clicked. All right, we'll cross. Check that with the timeline. Doctor, Adler returned with another sheet. Your levels are improving with the antidote. That means we caught it early. If you'd gone home tonight, it would have been a different outcome. An understatement. I didn't need the lecture. I already knew what that meant. Detective Miller kept her tone steady. We found a purchase receipt for antifreeze from a hardware store less than a mile from here. Timestamp matches this afternoon. That twisted in my gut worse than the poison. Whose name? Paid cash? she said. But the clerk remembers seeing 2 people. We're pulling the footage. I pressed the mask back in place. The oxygen hissed. My chest burned with every inhale, but at least the air was there. The curtain opened again and the nurse wheeled in another monitor, hooking it to the IV pump. Dr. Adler gave a quick nod of approval. We'll run labs every 4 hours. The detective leaned closer. When you can, we'll need a statement about tonight. Everything you remember. Don't leave anything out, no matter how small. Understood, I said. Old habit, straight answer, clipped tone. She almost smiled. Military. Army, I said. Explains the way you talk, she replied. I'll let you rest. We'll speak in the morning. She stepped out, pulling the curtain half shut again. Arthur's voice carried faintly through the hallway. She's making this up? You know how she is. I closed my eyes for a moment. The sound of him grating on my nerves was louder than the beeping monitor. My hand clenched around the blanket. The mask fogged again, cleared, fogged again. The nurse adjusted the drip and glanced at me. You're stable for now. Try to rest. I opened my eyes enough to catch a glimpse of Paige through the window, her smirk gone. She looked at me like she wasn't sure whether to be worried or angry. I didn't give her either back. I just stared until she dropped her gaze. The IV pump clicked, the monitor beeped, and the oxygen hissed in steady rhythm, anchoring me in a room that wasn't about excuses or noise, just numbers that didn't lie. The door to my room clicked open, not softly, but with the kind of force that announced who thought they owned the place. Arthur stepped in first, chin high, shoulders squared like he was still the only authority worth listening to. Behind him, Paige slid inside with her arms folded, her eyes darting around as if the machines might expose her before I even spoke. A hospital security guard trailed close, ready in case things turned. He gave me a quick nod like, "You want them out? Just say it." Arthur spoke before anyone else. "This is ridiculous. They've got you hooked up like you're dying when all that happened was you panicked. You've always been dramatic." I kept the oxygen mask in place, breathing evenly, staring back at him. Paige scoffed. She probably mixed something with her energy drinks, and now we're all supposed to believe Dad tried to kill her. Please? The guard shifted his weight, but I raised a hand just slightly. I didn't want them thrown out yet. Not before I looked them dead in the eye. I slid the mask aside. The lab says otherwise. My voice was rough but clear. It wasn't panic. It was antifreeze. Out of that glass you poured? Dad? Arthur's jaw flexed, but he didn't break stride. You think I'd poison my own daughter? That's insane? Not insane, I said. Predictable. Paige stepped closer. Voice low, sharp. You don't get it, Hannah. You've been gone too long. You come back from the army acting like you're above us, like we're nothing. You've been waiting to turn on us? I laughed once, humorless. I spent years defending people who actually had my back. Don't twist this into my fault because you can't handle the truth. Arthur raised a finger toward me, the same way he used to when I was a kid. The signal that meant, shut your mouth. Only this time I didn't. You made me feel like I was crazy, I said louder now, the monitor beeping faster with my pulse. Every time something was wrong, you told me I was imagining it. Tonight, I almost stopped breathing. And you still called it an act. Paige muttered, God, you're impossible. But her eyes flicked nervously to the guard. Arthur tried to soften his tone, which only made it more fake. Hannah, we're family. Families fight. But they don't try to destroy each other. Don't let these cops put ideas in your head. That was it. I leaned forward, voice steady. The cops didn't put anything in my head. The poison in my blood did. The guard finally stepped between us, holding up a hand. All right, that's enough. Visiting hours are done. But I wasn't done. One last thing, I said, locking eyes with Arthur. Whatever story you're trying to spin out there, it's over. I've got evidence now. Real evidence. You don't get to gaslight your way past this. For the first time, his expression cracked. Just a flicker quick enough that Paige didn't notice, but I did. A flash of fear under all that bluster. Paige tugged his arm. Let's just go. Arthur let himself be pulled toward the door, but not before he leaned close enough for me to smell the stale coffee on his breath. You think the army makes you untouchable? You're still mine to deal with. I didn't blink. Not anymore. The guard guided them out, shutting the door firmly behind them. The silence that followed was heavier than their shouting had been. I put the mask back on, pulling in a long breath of air that for the first time felt like mine. Outside the glass, I could see Detective Miller approaching, folder in hand, her face unreadable. I knew whatever came next would hinge on more than words in this room. Evidence had a way of cutting through lies, and that folder probably carried enough to slice the whole facade apart. Detective Miller walked in without a wasted step, her folder tucked tight under her arm, eyes scanning the room the way a soldier sizes up terrain. She nodded once at the guard, then set the folder down on the tray table beside my bed. Hannah, she said evenly, we've processed the kitchen. Do you feel up to hearing what we found? I adjusted the mask and gave her a small nod. My chest still felt raw, but I wasn't going to let that keep me from the truth. She flipped open the folder. Photos slid across the table, my drinking glass, the container Arthur had left on the counter, residue scraped from the sink drain. Each one was marked with tags, numbers, and the sterile precision of an investigation that didn't bend for excuses. The toxicology confirmed it, Miller said. Ethylene glycol, same compound in your blood. The levels in the glass match. This wasn't contamination, and it wasn't an accident. I stared at the photos. Seeing them laid out like that, official and undeniable, did more to steady me than any oxygen mask. Miller went on. We also pulled fingerprints. Your father's on the container. Your sister's text to a friend. She tapped another sheet of paper. Shows her bragging about teaching you a lesson. She didn't spell out the method, but the timing lines up. It's enough to file charges. For a second, the room seemed to tilt. Not from panic this time, but from the weight of knowing I hadn't imagined a damn thing. Every doubt, every dismissal they'd thrown at me, it was all a cover for something real, and now it was caught in print and lab results. Miller studied me carefully. I need you to understand what this means. Once we move forward, it won't just be a family dispute anymore. This becomes criminal. Protective detail, court dates, media attention. You'll be the key witness. I met her stare. I've been through worse in the army. At least here the enemy isn't hiding in a ditch. It's right in front of me. The faintest smirk tugged at her mouth, but it disappeared as quick as it came. All right, we'll file charges tonight. The guard stepped out to make a call, leaving the two of us. I reached for the photos again, my fingertips brushing the glossy surface. The glass I drank from looked so ordinary. That's what chilled me. It wasn't a weapon in the obvious sense. No gun, no knife, no bruises to point at. Just a household glass turned into something lethal. Miller lowered her voice. You're lucky the EMT caught it. Ethylene glycol doesn't show symptoms right away. By the time most people notice, it's too late. Whoever planned this counted on that. Her words sank in heavy. Arthur hadn't just lashed out in anger. He'd calculated. Paige hadn't just mocked me for attention. She'd enjoyed being part of it. That was colder than the tile floor I'd collapsed on. The nurse came in with another monitor, fussing over wires and IV bags, giving Miller space to close the folder. She left one page on the table, though. A printout of the toxicology results with my name at the top. Proof in black and white that I hadn't been the hysterical daughter they always claimed I was. As the nurse stepped out again, I leaned back against the pillow. My body was tired, but my mind was racing. I thought of every time Arthur told me to toughen up, every time Paige laughed off my pain. They'd built their power on convincing me I was weak. And now the facts in that folder had just pulled the rug out from under them. Miller gathered her papers and gave me a look that was part warning, part respect. Rest tonight. Tomorrow things will move quickly. I watched her leave, the folder tight in her grip, and let the steady hiss of the oxygen fill the silence. The truth was finally out of the shadows, and nothing in my family's world would ever look the same. The knock at the hospital room door wasn't tentative. It was the kind of firm rap that came from people who knew they had authority on their side. Two uniformed officers stepped in, their boots squeaking faintly against the linoleum. Behind them trailed Detective Miller, her folder under one arm, her expression set like granite. "Hannah," she said, "I need you to stay calm. We're taking the next step." Through the glass panel of the door, I caught sight of Arthur and Paige in the waiting area. Arthur was pacing, jaw tight, trying to look like a father worried about his sick daughter. Paige scrolled her phone, fake boredom painted on her face, but her bouncing knee betrayed nerves. The officers moved quickly, no hesitation. One went straight to Arthur. "Sir, stand up. You're under arrest." Arthur's head snapped up, confusion painted across his features like he'd just been insulted in public. "Excuse me," he barked, voice deep and commanding, the same tone he used to shut me down as a kid. "I'm here with my daughter. You've got the wrong idea." The officer didn't flinch. He repeated the Miranda rights in a steady voice, already reaching for Arthur's wrists. Paige's smirk cracked. She bolted halfway out of her chair. What is this?" "He didn't do anything. This is ridiculous." Detective Miller stepped in, her voice calm but sharp enough to slice the air. "Paige Grant, you're also under arrest?" Her eyes widened. "Me? For what?" "I didn't." The second officer pulled her hands behind her back before she could finish. Paige twisted, shooting me a look that was pure venom through the glass. If looks could kill, I'd be flatlined right there in the hospital bed. Arthur started to resist, shoulders squaring like he thought he could muscle his way out. "You think I'm going quietly?" The officer adjusted his grip, voice still calm. "You resist and we'll add charges. Don't make this worse." For a second, I thought Arthur would swing. He had that coiled energy I'd seen before when he drank too much or when something didn't go his way. But then his eyes darted to Miller, who hadn't moved an inch, but radiated control. He stopped fighting. The hallway grew tense as more hospital staff peeked around corners. Patients craned their necks from doorways. Arrests in a hospital weren't exactly a quiet affair. I sat there watching it unfold like a scene I'd never imagined living through. Arthur's face flushed red, veins straining at his neck, while Paige whined and cursed, demanding someone believe her. The two of them had always loved control, dominating the house, the narrative, me. And now, with their hands cuffed and their freedom slipping away, control was the one thing they no longer had. Miller gave the order, "Get them transported. Separate vehicles and keep them apart." The officers nodded, steering Arthur one way, Paige the other. Their voices carried down the hall even as they were led away. Arthur barking about lawyers, Paige insisting it was all my fault. I leaned back against the pillows, heart pounding, not from fear this time, but from the surreal sight of the people who had run my life suddenly stripped of their power. Miller stepped back into my room, her tone quieter now. "They'll be booked tonight. No contact orders will be in place before the morning. You'll be protected." I swallowed hard, still gripping the edge of the blanket. "So that's it? They're finally out of your shadow," she said. "For now, but court's coming and they'll fight. Just be ready." Her words landed heavy, but they couldn't erase what I'd just seen. The image of Arthur in handcuffs. Paige dragged out mid-protest. It was burned into my memory like a photograph no one could alter. I glanced at the glass panel again, now empty, the waiting area eerily quiet without them. For the first time in years, the silence felt like freedom. The first night out of the hospital, I sat on the edge of a mattress in a tiny one-bedroom apartment my Uncle Walter had found for me, staring at the bare walls. The place smelled faintly of fresh paint and industrial cleaner, and the hum of the fridge in the kitchenette was the only sound. It was so quiet it almost felt wrong. No slamming doors, no raised voices, no footsteps pacing outside my room. Just quiet. I didn't even unpack right away. My duffel bag sat slouched near the door, while I walked the apartment in small circles, testing every lock, checking every window. Old habits from the army mixed with years of living under Arthur's roof. I needed to know every exit, every weakness, every angle. Only when I felt satisfied that no one could barge in, did I finally drop into the chair at the little kitchen table. My uncle had stocked the fridge with basics. Milk, eggs, bread, a 6-pack of cola. It wasn't much, but it was more than I'd ever been given back home when Arthur controlled the groceries. I cracked open a can of soda and took a long drink, the fizz burning pleasantly in my throat. Something as simple as deciding what to drink without anyone watching felt like a rebellion. By the second day, reality started pressing in. I had to call the base, inform my commanding officer what had happened. The army didn't like surprises, and showing up in the news with my family's arrests was definitely a surprise. I braced myself for criticism, but instead, Colonel Harrison's voice was steady, even supportive. "Grant, you focus on recovery. You've got a hell of a record. Don't think this changes that. We'll back you up." Those words hit me harder than expected. I'd spent years earning my place in the military, proving I wasn't weak, despite Arthur drilling it into me that I'd never be enough. Now, hearing someone in authority say the opposite felt like a new kind of armor. The days blurred into a rhythm. Mornings, I ran around the block, keeping my lungs stretched, building stamina again. Afternoons, I met with a case officer who explained the protective measures in place. Nights, I sat at that kitchen table filling out paperwork, updating medical files, reviewing legal documents with my uncle. It was boring, exhausting, and overwhelming all at once. But somewhere in the middle of it, I noticed something new. I wasn't flinching anymore at every knock on the door or phone buzz. When the landline rang, it was usually the detective or my attorney, not Arthur yelling or Paige mocking. When the mail arrived, it was bills and advertisements, not notes slipped under my door to remind me of all the things I was failing at. Still, the calls came. Blocked numbers. Voicemails that started with silence before a whisper slipped through. "You've ruined everything," Paige hissed in one. In another, Arthur's voice thundered. "You think this ends us? You're not finished with me. I saved every single one." I knew better than to delete evidence. Late one evening, while reviewing those recordings with the detective, I caught myself laughing, not out of humor, but disbelief. "They actually think this scares me anymore," I said, shaking my head. The detective leaned back in her chair, smirking. "That's the thing about control freaks. Once they lose it, they don't know how to function. Keep documenting. Let their desperation build the case for us." That night, I stood on the balcony of the apartment, staring at the glow of the city in the distance. For the first time, I let myself imagine a life that wasn't built on survival alone. Maybe I could re-enlist full-time, push for promotion, or even teach recruits. I wasn't just a victim lying on a kitchen floor. I was a soldier with a future, and that thought made the air feel cleaner, sharper in my lungs. The small space around me started to feel like more than just temporary housing. I bought a lamp shaped like a grenade. Dark humor, sure, but it made me grin every time I turned it on. I hung up my army commendations on the wall, proof that I was more than Arthur's narrative. Slowly, the apartment stopped feeling like an empty box and started feeling like mine. When my uncle stopped by one weekend with takeout barbecue, he looked around and nodded approvingly. "Place feels different already," he said. I raised an eyebrow. "Different? How? Like you live here," he answered simply, unpacking the ribs and cornbread. It was the first meal I'd eaten in years where every bite didn't taste like someone else's control. The freedom wasn't perfect. Court dates loomed and Arthur's threats weren't going away. But as I cleaned up that night, stacking the takeout containers in the trash and locking the door behind my uncle, I realized something vital. They could scream, threaten, and twist the story all they wanted. I had my own ground now, and I wasn't giving it up. The envelope showed up in my mailbox on a Tuesday, tucked between a grocery flyer and a water bill. The handwriting on the front made my stomach turn before I even pulled it out. Heavy block letters like he was carving each one into the page. "Arthur Grant, No return address, but he didn't need one. I knew exactly where it came from, county jail. I carried it inside without opening it, setting it on the counter next to my half-drunk coffee. For a while, I just stared at it, weighing whether it deserved even 5 seconds of my attention. After everything, the poison, the lies, the years of belittlement, why should I give him the satisfaction of being heard? But ignoring Arthur was never simple. His silence was just as dangerous as his voice, and I needed to know which version was on the page. I slid a knife under the flap and unfolded the letter. The smell of cheap ink and paper hit me. His words ran across 3 pages, all caps, like he was shouting through the pen. Hannah, you've been brainwashed. You've let outsiders turn you against your own blood. You've embarrassed this family, dragged our name through the mud. Do you think the army respects you now? They're laughing at you. You're nothing without me. When you were on the kitchen floor, you should have remembered who kept a roof over your head. My jaw clenched so tight it hurt. He didn't admit anything. Not one word about the antifreeze. Not a sliver of accountability, just more twisting, more gaslighting, more trying to turn my survival into a betrayal. He even wrote that Paige was only trying to help me learn discipline and that I'd turned her kindness into an accusation. The gall almost made me laugh. Kindness. Pouring poison into my glass wasn't kindness. By the end, the tone shifted. This doesn't have to end like this. You can still make this right. If you come to court and drop the lies, I'll forgive you. We can be a family again. That word, family, sat on the page like a stain. He wielded it like a weapon, the same way he always had, trying to make me believe blood ties meant loyalty, no matter the cost. I folded the letter carefully, slipped it into a plastic evidence sleeve, and added it to the growing folder I kept for the detective. It wasn't proof of poisoning, but it was proof of who Arthur really was. A man who could watch his daughter choke on the floor and still call it discipline. End of chapter. That night, I brought the letter to my uncle's house. He read it once, his lips pressed in a hard line, then tossed it onto the table with a snort. He hasn't changed a damn bit, he said, grabbing a beer from the fridge. Still thinks the world owes him something. I asked him if I should respond, if ignoring my father would make things worse. My uncle shook his head. The only response he deserves is you showing up in court, standing tall, and letting the system finish him off. Anything else gives him power. I knew he was right, but the words dug under my skin. For days, they echoed in my head. You're nothing without me? That line had been his mantra since I was a kid. He said it when I won my first Rautis Award in high school. He said it when I shipped off to basic training. He said it when I came home from deployment with medals pinned to my chest. And still, a part of me had believed it. That's how deep his grip went. But then I thought about the moment in the ER when the EMT leaned close and told me, "Stay with me." That was real. That was someone fighting for me, not tearing me down. My father's letter wasn't truth. It was the last flail of a man who'd lost control. At the next meeting with my attorney, Captain Wilson, I slid the evidence sleeve across the table. She read the letter silently, her brow furrowing. "This is good," she said finally. "Not for him, for us. It shows mindset. It shows he's still trying to manipulate you. Judges notice this kind of thing. The Army's legal liaison said the same. He's building our case for us. Let him keep writing." That gave me an idea. I didn't reply directly, but I didn't block the jail from sending more mail either. If Arthur wanted to rant, let him. Every page became another nail in his own coffin. The next letter came a week later, then another, each one wilder than the last. One accused me of being controlled by military propaganda. Another said Paige was innocent and that I twisted her loyalty into a crime. He even scribbled one half, Paige rant about how I never respected the way he sacrificed to raise me. I read them all with a steady hand, no longer shaken. They didn't feel like threats anymore. They felt like confessions, even if he didn't realize it. Proof that Arthur Grant wasn't some misunderstood father. He was exactly what I'd always feared. a man who believed breaking me was his right. Late one night, after adding another letter to the folder, I sat back on the couch, the television muted in front of me. For the first time, I didn't feel like I was waiting for his approval or fearing his disapproval. I felt something stronger, quieter, steadier. I felt free. And when I finally turned out the light and locked up for the night, I knew the next time I saw Arthur wouldn't be in some emotional standoff. It would be across a courtroom under oath with the truth lined up against him. The next morning started with boots pounding against the gym floor at Fort Bragg. The smell of sweat and chalk filled the air as I tightened the straps on my lifting gloves. I wasn't there to prove anything to Arthur anymore. I was there for myself. The army had always been my escape, the one place where effort actually counted, where respect had to be earned. After my third set, Sergeant Stone clapped me on the shoulder. "Heard about what went down?" he said in that blunt army way. No pity in his voice, just acknowledgement. "You still breathing?" "That's what matters," I smirked. "Breathing is the goal," he nodded. "Good now? Let's make sure you're strong enough to keep it that way." He shoved a weighted vest into my hands and motioned toward the track. No speeches, no questions, just work. That was what I needed. By the time we finished sprints, my lungs burned, but the fire felt clean earned. Nothing like the poison Arthur tried to feed me. Sweat soaked through my shirt, dripping into my eyes, and Stone just grinned. "See, you're tougher than whatever they throw at you." That afternoon, I stopped by the rec center where a few of the guys from my unit were playing cards. Corporal Diaz waved me over. "Hey, Hannah, get in on this hand. We're taking his money." He jerked a thumb at Private First Class Jones, who was already halfway through losing a pile of singles. I sat down, the laughter wrapping around me like a shield. For the first time in weeks, I wasn't watching my back. I wasn't calculating every move. I was just another soldier sitting at a table, part of the group. The conversation shifted fast, as it always did with us. Diaz was bragging about his new car. Jones was swearing he'd never date another girl from Tinder, and then Stone leaned back in his chair and gave me a look. "So, what's the plan? You sticking around base housing or moving off post?" I hesitated for a second, then shrugged. "Got a place in town, small but it's mine." Jones whistled. "Finally cutting the cord, huh?" "Good for you." I laughed under my breath. Cutting the cord sounded too soft. I'd severed the whole damn power line. The thing about the military was they didn't need every detail to get it. Everyone had their own story, their own fight waiting back home. They knew what it meant to face down family demons. Even if the demons didn't look the same over the next few weeks. I leaned into that brotherhood harder than I ever had before. PT runs at dawn, drills in the afternoon. Co-hall dinners filled with trash talk and serious arguments about which MRE was actually edible. It was a rhythm that kept me grounded. But it wasn't just the routines. It was the moments in between, the quiet nods, the unspoken understanding. After evening formation one day, Lieutenant Evans pulled me aside. "Hannah, you need anything? Rides? Backup? Even just someone to stand in a room with you, you ask? We don't leave our own exposed." That hit me harder than I expected. I had spent so many years being told by Arthur that I was alone, that I couldn't survive without him. And here was a man who barely knew my personal life telling me the exact opposite. "You're not alone. Not here." I took him up on that offer sooner than I thought. The calls from blocked numbers hadn't stopped. My phone would buzz during chow or in the barracks, and I'd see another voicemail notification. Sometimes it was Paige's voice, dripping venom. Sometimes it was Arthur patched through from jail, still finding ways to needle me. One night, after a particularly nasty message from Paige about how I ruined everything, I felt my chest tighten. Not panic, not poison this time. Just a surge of rage I couldn't shake off. I drove straight to the base and found Stone still in the gym. He looked up from the pull-up bar and raised an eyebrow. "You look like you're about to deck somebody." "Wish I could?" I muttered. "Then don't sit on it. Burn it off." He tossed me a jump rope and we went at it until my arms and legs were jelly. Afterward, sitting on the bench gulping water, he clapped me on the back. "You're not giving him space in your head, you're giving it to us. That's the difference." That night, lying in my barracks room, I realized what he meant. Arthur and Paige wanted me isolated, cornered. But every mile I ran, every laugh I shared at the card table, every nod I got in formation chipped away at their power. The army had always been about survival and discipline, but now it was something bigger. It was family, the kind that didn't demand blind loyalty or obedience, but respect and trust. It was a brotherhood that made Arthur's version of family look like the fraud it had always been. And when I showed up to drill the next day, with sweat still drying on my uniform and my boots caked in mud, I realized something I hadn't dared admit before. I wasn't just surviving anymore. I was winning. The hum of the fluorescent lights in the legal office made the place feel colder than it really was. I sat across from Captain Wilson, the judgy attorney assigned to help me prepare, his desk buried under stacks of paperwork and binders. He slid one toward me. The tab labeled Grant. Seeing my own name tied to Arthur and Paige like that made my stomach twist, but I kept my face steady. Wilson leaned back in his chair. "You've been through hell, Captain Grant. But this is where we shift the fight. Court doesn't care about tears. It cares about evidence. Luckily, we've got plenty." He opened the binder to a page with photos. The glass from the kitchen, the antifreeze container, and copies of Paige's text messages bragging to her friend. It was surreal, staring at the proof of how far they'd gone to silence me. For years, they'd told me I was dramatic, weak, too sensitive. And here it was in black and white: murder weapon, motive, fingerprints. I forced my voice steady. "I want them to see me calm, not rattled, not angry, just done with them." Wilson nodded. "That's the right attitude. Juries read people more than they read files. If you walk in looking like the soldier you are, collected, professional, it'll cut through every excuse they throw out." The prep wasn't glamorous. Days blurred into hours of testimony practice, going over every detail, every possible question Arthur's attorney might sling at me. Did you provoke him? Were you exaggerating? Maybe it was an accident. I learned to answer without hesitation, to shut down every attempt at twisting the truth. At night, I'd go home to my small apartment and collapse onto the couch, staring at the ceiling. The calls from unknown numbers had slowed, but hadn't stopped. Sometimes I'd let them ring. Sometimes I'd answer just to catch the silence on the other end. It was pathetic, really. They couldn't reach me with poison anymore, so they tried with whispers. One evening, I was sorting through my uniforms when there was a knock at the door. It was Stone holding a 6-pack. "You looked like you could use one," he said. We cracked open the beers at my tiny table, and he studied me for a moment before asking, "You nervous?" I chuckled. "I've jumped out of planes, Stone." "Court should be easier." "Sure," he said, taking a sip. "Except a jump ends in 60 seconds. This could drag for weeks. And it's not just about proving them guilty. It's about proving you're stronger than what they tried to do to you." He wasn't wrong. Court wasn't about me begging for justice. It was about showing Arthur and Paige they couldn't break me anymore. When the trial date was finally set, I stood in front of my closet for longer than I care to admit. I bypassed my dress blues. Too formal, too heavy with the weight of ceremony. Instead, I chose a sharp navy suit, hair pinned back tight, professional, controlled. I wanted the jury to see a soldier, yes, but more than that, a woman who refused to be a victim. The night before, Uncle Walter called. His voice was rough with years of hard living, but steady. "You walk in there tomorrow, and you don't flinch. You've been carrying this family's truth on your back for years. Time to drop it on the table and let it crush them." I smiled faintly. "Is that the official family pep talk?" "Damn right," he said. "Now get some sleep." Sleep didn't come easy. My dreams twisted with images of Arthur yelling, Paige smirking, the cold kitchen tiles against my skin. But every time the panic surged, I reminded myself, Tomorrow it won't be my word against theirs. It will be evidence, witnesses, professionals who saw through the lies. The morning of the trial, I arrived at the courthouse, flanked by 2 military friends who refused to let me walk in alone. Cameras flashed as we stepped inside, reporters shouting questions. Captain Grant, how do you feel about facing your own father? Do you think your sister will testify against you? I didn't respond. My heels clicked against the marble floor, echoing louder than the chaos outside. Inside, Wilson went over the plan one last time. We start with the EMT. His testimony will set the tone. Then the toxicology report. Then you ready? I straightened my shoulders. I've been ready since the kitchen floor. As the bailiff called the court to order, I caught a glimpse of Arthur and Paige at the defense table. Arthur's jaw was clenched, his eyes darting between me and the jury box. Paige looked pale, her usual smug confidence cracked around the edges. When the judge entered, the air shifted. This wasn't the kitchen anymore. This wasn't their house, their rules. This was neutral ground. And for once, the truth had the upper hand. The prosecutor stood tall, his voice crisp. Ladies and gentlemen of the jury, you've heard the facts. This case is not about family disagreements or exaggerations. This case is about deliberate harm. You will see that the defendants, Arthur Grant and Paige Grant, conspired to poison Captain Hannah Grant, their own daughter and sister. The defense fired back quickly. Arthur's lawyer leaned on the podium, trying for a soft tone, almost mocking. This is a family matter blown out of proportion. My client is a strict father, not a criminal. My client's daughter misinterpreted events in a moment of stress. And Paige, she's a young woman caught up in her sister's dramatics. The first witness was the EMT who had saved me. He spoke with calm authority, describing the scene. The defense lawyer jumped in. Isn't it possible you overreacted? Panic attacks can look similar, can they not? The EMT didn't blink. I've worked hundreds of calls. I know the difference between hyperventilation and poisoning. This was poisoning. Her vitals confirmed it, and later tests matched exactly what I suspected. It wasn't an overreaction. It was experience. Next, the toxicology expert held up lab reports. Ethylene glycol was detected both in the patient's blood and in the liquid from the water glass. The fingerprints on the container matched Arthur Grant. In my expert opinion, this was deliberate ingestion of a toxic substance. When cross-examined, he stated firmly, ethylene glycol doesn't wander its way into water glasses. Someone had to pour it in. The prosecutor then presented enlarged photos of Paige's text messages. She'll finally learn her place tonight? Paige dropped her gaze, her face pale. Then it was my turn. I walked to the witness stand, my boots clicking against the polished floor. I swore in and recounted the events of that night. During cross-examination, the defense lawyer pressed, "Could it be that you're exaggerating now because of resentment?" I stared straight at him. "I've had conflicts because they were abusive. I don't exaggerate. I serve my country. I don't fabricate being poisoned to make a point. My medical records, the toxicology reports, the EMT, the doctor, they all prove what happened. This isn't resentment. This is survival." When it was his turn, Arthur took the stand. "I never tried to harm my daughter. She's exaggerating, just like she always has. I'm strict, yes, but discipline isn't a crime?" The prosecutor rose slowly. "Strict fathers don't leave antifreeze in their daughters' water glasses. This isn't discipline. This is attempted murder." Arthur's composure faltered. Paige's turn was worse. She tried to claim she was joking in her texts. The prosecutor read her message aloud. "She'll finally learn her place tonight? Is that a joke?" Paige stammered, her voice cracking. I didn't mean it literally." Finally, closing arguments arrived. The prosecutor's voice was firm. "This is not about misunderstandings. This is about 2 defendants who conspired to silence someone they couldn't control. I ask you to deliver justice." The defense's closing sounded hollow by comparison. When the jury returned, the room was silent. The foreman stood, handing the verdict slip to the judge. The judge read it, then passed it to the clerk, who cleared his throat. "On the charge of attempted murder, we find the defendant, Arthur Grant, guilty. On the charge of conspiracy to commit assault with a deadly substance, we find the defendant, Paige Grant, guilty. The words echoed like a gunshot. Clean and final. Arthur's face went blank. Paige broke into sobs. Deputies stepped forward, placing cuffs on Arthur and Paige as they were led out. Arthur didn't look at me, Paige did. Tears streaking her face, her mouth moving silently. You ruined everything? I sat taller. For once, their words had no weight. The silence around me wasn't suffocating anymore. It was freedom. The courtroom emptied slowly. I stayed seated for a moment, letting the weight of the verdict settle in. For years, Arthur's voice had filled every corner of my head, telling me I was weak, useless, dramatic. And now he and Paige were in shackles, led away under the bright lights of a courtroom that finally saw them for what they were. When I finally stood, Uncle Walter was there. He didn't say anything. He didn't have to. His hand on my shoulder said more than words. Captain Wilson, my attorney, came up right behind him. You fought harder than most people could. You should be proud. I nodded, though proud wasn't quite the word. It was about survival. Outside, cameras flashed, but I kept walking. I wasn't there for sound bites. Justice didn't need a headline. It was already written into the verdict. Back at the base, my unit didn't make a big show of it. Stone just tossed me a water bottle during PT and muttered, "Heard it went your way." In their world, silence and presence were the truest congratulations. Life didn't magically smooth out, but the constant tension in my chest finally began to ease. My apartment in town became more than a place to crash. It was a home. I filled it with things that had no connection to him. A worn couch, a bookshelf, a photo of my unit. One weekend, I drove out to the lake. I sat on the pier, my boots dangling over the water. For the first time, I wasn't waiting for the other shoe to drop. The silence was mine, and it was clean. Paige tried once more to reach me from county lockup. A letter scrawled in messy handwriting. I tossed it straight into the trash, unopened. Arthur didn't try at all. Instead, I wrote my own letter, this one to the Judge Advocate General's office, offering to mentor younger soldiers dealing with family crisis. Not every battle wore a uniform. Months passed. My name was no longer tied to Arthur's in headlines. People started to recognize me again for who I was, Captain Hannah Grant. Just me. When my unit deployed again, I boarded the plane with a calm I hadn't known in years. The roar of the engines wasn't drowning out fear. This time it was carrying me forward. In the middle of the flight, Stone leaned over and said, "Feels different, doesn't it?" "Yeah," I said, adjusting my pack. "This time I'm not running from anything." After we rotated back home, the Army recognized me with an accommodation for leadership under pressure. I stood at attention while the citation was read, but all I could think about was that night on the kitchen floor, how close it came to ending. Justice hadn't erased the scars, but it had done something better. It gave me back control. One evening, sitting on my porch with Uncle Walter, he looked at me and said, "You know, Hannah, your dad always thought control was power, but he never understood discipline, truth, and grit. That's power, and you've got that in spades." I smiled.
Not bitter, not angry, just free.
"Yeah," I said. "And he can't touch that anymore." The sky stretched wide above us. The past was still there, but it didn't own me. It never would again. Justice came not with fireworks, but in the steady beat of everyday life finally lived without fear. And as I leaned back in my chair, I realized something simple. The loudest revenge wasn't anger. It was peace. Looking back, I see now that the real battle was never in the courtroom or on the kitchen floor. It was in proving to myself that I was worth fighting for. Arthur and Paige thought silence meant weakness, but silence was where I gathered strength, where I let the truth sharpen itself until it cut through every lie they told. The Army taught me discipline, but life taught me resilience. And when both came together, I learned the one lesson they never could. Justice doesn't always roar. Sometimes it shows up quietly in a steady breath, in a life rebuilt, in the freedom to laugh without fear. That's the kind of victory no one can take. If this story resonated with you, I encourage you to share your thoughts in the comments below. We are always listening to stories of resilience and courage. If you'd like to learn more about how we can support one another, be sure to subscribe and share this channel.